ceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish, we thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is grateful for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences into present tense exchanges of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when we don't get to do it, in person. Town Hall will continue to produce online content throughout this fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, even host live streams from our building. Meanwhile, if like me, you just can't log enough hours on Zoom or YouTube, know that many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form under the header digital media, including tonight's talk. Frankly, if you know somebody that you want to share it with, please let them know that it's still available. Back to tonight's event. The program will likely run 45 minutes or so, followed by an audience Q&A. Senator Brown and Executive Constantine will take questions from the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. Please keep your questions concise, and Town Hall's Candace Wilkinson-Davis will join us to moderate and see that they get to as many as possible. Also, know that you can view the event here, I say both here on Crowdcast or over on our YouTube page if you want to utilize that platform's closed captioning feature. Just know that it's easier for us if you pose your questions right here. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Like tonight's event, one of the upsides of virtual programming are the extraordinary conversations they make possible. Upcoming, Derek Black with Catherine Dunn about how democracy is weakened when public education is defunded. Michael Ian Black and Mike Birbiglia just announced on how we can redefine masculinity for the next generation of our sons. Ron Chu and Naomi Ishisaka on the foundational role of Asian Americans in this community. Eddie Cole with Sean Scott discussing the influence of college campuses and the struggle for Black freedom. And the brilliant music critic Alex Ross in conversation with the equally brilliant music critic Ann Powers about Wagner and society. There's much to learn about plenty more at townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's programming is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Civics programs in particular are supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW, and the Wincote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. When we thank you for your support, know that we're grateful to you all for purchasing a ticket to this event tonight. The response to COVID-19 is posing unprecedented challenges to nonprofits. And if you support Town Hall's mission to make ideas and inspiration accessible to the whole community, we hope you will consider further support with a membership or by making a donation through the button at the bottom of your screen. Last point of infomercial, that is, this isn't an easy time for booksellers either, and since we know you will want to learn more about the past and future of progressivism as explored in Senator Brown's book, I urge you to buy your own copy here, now, tonight through our local and independent partners at Third Place Books using the, well, it's conveniently positioned button at the bottom of your screen. All right. Sherrod Brown is Ohio's senior senator. He was born and raised there, spending his summers working on his family's farm. More on that bit of biographical detail in a moment. He started his political career as an Ohio State representative in 1975 and later served as Secretary of State from 1983 to 1991. He was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1993 until his election to the Senate in 2006. He's dedicated his life in public service to fighting for what he calls the dignity of work, the belief that hard work should pay off for everyone. Alongside his advocacy for American workers, he is known as a legislative champion of healthcare reform measures and strengthening our civic commitment to education. In the Senate, he's been chair of the Agriculture Subcommittee on Hunger, Nutrition, and Family Farms and the Banking Subcommittee on Economic Policy, as well as a member of the Finance, Veterans Affairs, and Select Committee on Ethics. He's known for his capacity to inspire and for his willingness to get down into the weeds of policy. To wit, in 2018, he accepted an appointment as co-chair of the newly formed Joint Multi-Employer Pension Solvency Committee. As I'm sure they'll discuss tonight, while Ohio has a long and proud tradition of progressive politics and was until recently considered a critical bellwether of the national political mood, the ultimate swing state, as of 2020, he is in fact the only Democratic statewide elected official, having won re-election during the 2018 midterms with a comfortable 7+ point margin. Clearly, Senator Brown knows how to articulate progressive values in a way that folks across the spectrum can hear themselves and their dreams reflected honestly. Finally, Senator Brown is also an author. His first book, Congress from the Inside, Observations from the Majority and the Minority, was published in 1999. And in 2004, Myths of Free Trade, Why American Trade Policy Has Failed, provided a front row seat for a horror show of corporate lobbying and political intimidation. Dow Constantine is serving his third term as King County executive. I felt like that was a really inelegant segue. Something like, meanwhile, Speaking of corporate lobbying and political intimidation, anyway, Constantine is serving his third term as King County Executive. A lifelong Washingtonian, he began his professional career practicing law and served 3 years as chair of the 34th District Democrats. A former member of the King County Council and the Washington State Senate and House of Representatives, and a 3-time graduate of the University of Washington, Dow's time in the executive's chair has been focused on the constant game of whack-a-mole that is politics in one of the nation's most populous, affluent, diverse, and influential counties, all while keeping his eyes on the prize of addressing this generation's greatest challenges, building equity and opportunity, and confronting climate change. Senator Brown's book, Desk 88, 8 Progressive Senators Who Changed America, is the topic of the discussion tonight, but we'll see exactly where they end up. Please join me in welcoming Executive Dow Constantine and Senator Sherrod Brown.
Thank you so much, Weir. It's really kind of you to invite me to host Senator Brown here. And I'm thrilled that we're joined by so many folks tonight who are keenly interested in what he has to share with us. Senator, I talked to you a little earlier. I said, for those who haven't had the opportunity to read the book, which I have, I wanted you to kind of set the stage. It's about politics. But it's built around 8 really well-researched biographical profiles with this connecting theme or thread of progressivism and the desk 88, tying it all together. Set the stage about the desk and about what it took you to get this book done.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Executive Constantine. I appreciate it. And thank you for the generous introduction and the panoply of subject matter that I thought of listening to. The influence of the composer Wagner on our day would be an interesting topic, and so many others. Thank you for that. I like many institutions, the Senate especially. You would not be surprised. Executive is. When you come to the Senate, when Maria Cantwell came in 2001, when Patty Murray came in 93, you are assigned, you kind of operate under seniority. So you choose your office by seniority, you choose your committees mostly by seniority initially, and you choose your desk on the Senate floor. So there were 10 desks left when the 10 freshmen, it was our turn. And I had heard from a senior member that senators carved their names in the bottom of their desk drawer. So there were these 10 desks left, and I started pulling out drawers and just looking at names. And the desk that one caught my eye, about the 3rd or 4th desk, it said Hugo Black, Alabama, George McGovern, South Dakota, Glen Taylor, Idaho, and then it just said Kennedy. No first name, no state. So I walked over to Ted Kennedy's desk, about 4 desks away. He was sitting there. I said, Ted, come here a second, would you? And he walked over. I said, which brother's desk is this? He said, well, it's got to be Bobby's because I have Jack's desk. And so I thought, well, okay, you obviously choose way before I do. And so I just looked at this desk and I just thought, there have to be stories about the people who carved their names in the desk. And my wife, because we both kind of subscribe to the theory that to do a job well, you should know what the people who preceded you did and how they did their jobs and what you can learn from them. So she ordered a bunch of books for me for the holidays, and I just started reading books about the Senate, and it piqued my interest, especially about these 8. 8 was just a random number. I mean, I don't know why I stopped at 8 or went into as many as 8, but it really taught me, and I saw coming through, and understand they're all white men, because that's pretty much who served in the Senate, as you know. Executive Constantine over the decades, and it spans from 1926 when Hugo Black came to George McGovern and William Proxmire in the 80s and 90s, and so over about 70 years, and told their story and the progressive thread that ran through these 8 senators and how it made this country better. And that's the story.
So the progressive thread. If you could just give us a little more context about how you're defining this progressivism that ties together all of these senators and yourself, all 8, and you and others that you describe in the book, because it's not just about these 8 senators. You talk about a lot of other senators who didn't have the privilege of residing at Desk 88, but nevertheless made contributions to the movement. What are the tenets of your progressivism?
It's standing up for, it's really speaking up for people without a voice. It's understanding the role of government is a positive role in people's lives. It's a check on corporate power. And today's politics, today's government, today's society, we see more than in recent memory the importance of government. That central government. I mean, think of what Marie and Patty and others did with that $600 a week unemployment compensation. Patty and I sit on the committee that does that, and that kept the $600 a week from that the Senate and House passed, that expired unfortunately in August when Trump and McConnell let it expire, kept some studies showed kept 12 million people out of poverty. So it's clearly the role of what comes through in each of these 8 senators, and they were very different. They were uneven. Some started off not progressive at all, but what they had in common was a check on corporate power and fighting for people that didn't have a particular voice or place in our society. Some felt
Hugo Black, for example, great progressive senator and ultimately Supreme Court justice, started off as a Klan member.
Yeah, Black was elected in 1926. He said at the time, in understanding African Americans weren't voting in Alabama and the Ku Klux Klan, it was really the peak of their electoral strength, if not their violent actions, probably both. But Black said, I either had to choose between the big mules and the Klan. The big mules were the power companies, the coal companies, the mining company, the coal companies, the power companies, those who were the most powerful people in society. It's either they or the Klan. He said, I chose the Klan. He renounced the Klan soon after his election. He wasn't particularly good on civil rights until he joined the court. He was Roosevelt's first Supreme Court justice. He later, full circle, in 1956, 30 years after his first election, he was burned in effigy at his law school, at his all-white law school, because of Brown v. Board of Education, where he struck down segregation of the public schools and was a major player with Justice Douglas. So, and Earl Warren. So the book, these men, again, all white men, that will not be the story in 10 or 20 or 30 years, but these men they all were uneven in their courage and their humanity and their positions. Nobody came as far as Black did, but some stumbled, and we all do.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Bill Douglas, the way in which you have brought these men in relatively short chapters, kind of thrown them into relief to understand both their strengths and their weaknesses, the mistakes that they made and that they themselves admitted to have making, and ultimately the impact they were able to make by growing and
Yeah, I can speak to that because I think I know where he was going. Al Gore Sr. held this desk, the vice president's father, and he had an uneven past. And early in his Senate term, he took on Strom Thurmond, refused, as one of only 3 Southern Democrats, they were all Democrats in those days, refused to sign the Southern Manifesto, the racist document that Strom Thurmond pointed out. But then he backslid a little. In 1964, he voted against the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, against his son and daughter's view. They wanted him to vote for it. Al Gore Jr., his son, the former future vice president, begged his dad to vote for it. He didn't. But after he was reelected to his 3rd term, in his last term, as it turned out, he ended up advocating for civil rights. He voted for the Civil Rights Bill. He took on his own party in Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson. He fought for a much higher tax rate for the wealthiest taxpayers. And then he opposed Nixon's 2 appointments to the Supreme Court. And those 2 appointments were Southerners. And he knew that when he opposed them, that it very well could cost him his seat. And Nixon made an example of him in 1970. And Nixon's Southern strategy sort of began with defeating Al Gore Sr. So I think there is some proclivity or some record or some likelihood that a number of people after in public office for a while get more courageous as they serve longer. And I think that Gore decided he was not going to ever run for president at that point. He had thought about it earlier. I'm not sure, I forget his exact age, but he was in a place in his career. He thought, I'm going to do what I think's right. I'm going to take on Nixon, and he thought it might cost him a seat, and it did.
And it's interesting you talk, not a resident of Desk 88, but you talk about Ted Kennedy and about how he didn't really become great at being a senator until after his disastrous presidential bid in 1980, and then he focused all of his energy on the Senate and became, in your words, perhaps the greatest United States senator ever. And that is certainly a phenomenon, as it is on the court, where people over time sometimes come into their own. They are able to rise to the occasion, and we all have our fingers crossed for that.
Yeah, and I think that people, as you get older, you accrue some wisdom, if that's the right verb. You might have more courage. You realize that life's a little shorter than maybe you thought it was when you were younger, and you realize you really want to make a difference, and you stand up. And that's clearly what Gore did. I think a number of them did. One senator, a guy named Glen from Idaho, served just one term. In his third year in the Senate, he took on the most virulent racist from Mississippi, Theodore Bilbo, on the first day of this third year in office, and he was always rejected. I mean, he was always good in civil rights in a state that's about as white as there is, Idaho. At least certainly didn't have African Americans in any numbers, and he was willing to take that chance. And there are other reasons that he wasn't reelected, but some are more gutsy than others, and some have more wisdom than others. And they all, by the end, I would call all 8 of these progressives. I'm not sure they all would label themselves that, but they surely were that in the challenge to corporate power and the fighting for what we would once say the little guy.
So we're talking about progressive electeds, but let's talk about progressive eras. You really call out a number of progressive awakenings that happened in America, and the speed with which the forces of the status quo get reorganized and pushed back. And that's kind of the central theme of the book. Can you talk a little bit about those eras?
Yeah, I think that's the lesson for today in many ways, but we can put that off till later in the conversation. From the first senator from 1926 with Black, there were sort of 2.5 progressive eras, if you will. There was the Roosevelt years, there was the Johnson years, and then there were the Obama years that were truncated because of the election so soon after Obama won his Senate seat. I mean, won the presidency. But when progressives win, and this is really the most important thing to remember, when progressives win, meaning House, Senate, and a decisive win in the presidency, we do big things. We do big things that are durable, that the public benefits from for decades. Literally, Roosevelt, rural electrification. You know what that meant east of the Cascades, and really probably throughout the state of Washington. And you know what it obviously did with power, with electric power and hydroelectric power in your region of the country. When Roosevelt with collective bargaining, minimum wage, an 8-hour workday, and Social Security, Johnson, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid, civil voting rights, the Equal Opportunities Act, Head Start, Pell Grants, all that we benefit from still. And Obama had 2 big victories, the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank, the Wall Street reform. But his success was cut short. But what happens so often is progressives, we do big things and then we lose 2 years later. And I would argue we don't lose because we overreached. We lose because voters so often don't see the advantage right away of what happened. So by the time voters went to the polls after Obama won in 2008 and in 2010, they didn't feel like their lives had gotten better. And that's the lesson for next year. If Democrats win, as I think we will, and Biden will win decisively, the voters have to understand, we've got to give the voters something quickly that they benefit from: a higher minimum wage, Medicare at 55, the child tax credit, something that people say, I voted for President Biden and Senator so-and-so, my life got better. We didn't do that with Obama, and it didn't so much happen that way with Johnson either. And then there's an election where you're, as you point out, you're playing defense, just trying to hold on. And we spent 10 years trying to hold on to the Affordable Care Act against a Republican onslaught, a very well-funded Koch brothers Republican onslaught. And the same with Wall Street reform. They keep chipping away at it because we lost the next election. And it's important that you win 2 or 3 in a row like Roosevelt, and then you really can solidify those progressive gains.
So well, I think we should come back to the question of what's going to happen in the next 2 months, in the next 6 months, in the next 2 years, because that's exciting. And I want to talk about it towards the end of this. But let's go off on a couple tangents. First, you mentioned rural electrification, and that brings us back to the Tennessee Valley Authority, a huge federal program that dramatically changed living conditions and economics at the South, and yet South has continued to drift rightward, and from the perspective of probably most people on this call, voting against their interests. What the heck's the deal with the South? And do we have some chances to make inroads there this year?
What it's about for sure is race. I mean, in the state of Maine, I believe Barack Obama, these numbers aren't precise. Barack Obama got over 50% of the white vote in Maine. In Mississippi, he barely, I think he didn't quite get double digits. I think he got 9%. And the South, we clearly haven't dealt well with our racist past. Structural racism it's alive and well in my state. It's alive and well in King County. It's alive and well in Mississippi. It manifests itself different places, different ways, but the same viciousness and immorality and of racism. But so the South is white voters before blacks could vote were voting Democratic for segregationist white Southerners. Soon when Johnson signed the '64 Voting Rights Act, or 65, I guess when he signed either civil rights or voting rights, he said, I'm the South, we will be in the minority in the South, or I'm signing away the Democrats' future in the South. And he was, because whites then switched to the Republican Party. But to your question, the future, someone said to me once, the Midwest is getting more Republican, but isn't there yet. My state, Michigan, Wisconsin, maybe Minnesota, the South is getting more Democratic than isn't there yet. That's all about demographics. Virginia is already a Democratic state. It was more Republican than Ohio a decade ago. It's changed because of demographics and young people. Demographics meaning people of color and young people. My state hasn't changed much demographically, so we have gotten a little bit more Republican in every few years. But Biden has a real chance of winning North Carolina and Georgia. People even say Texas. I think that's not going to happen yet, but we're running competitively there. I think Biden can win Ohio, but I know that it's harder to win Ohio for Biden. Clinton won it twice. Obama won it twice, but it's a harder state to win, because of demographics. We don't keep too many of our young people leave and go to Charlotte or come to Seattle or go to Chicago. And so when that happens, and the energy of the young and the diversity of the young and the general more progressive nature of the young makes it harder when our state is older and isn't getting any less white, if you will.
So tell me a little bit about Ohio, a little bit more about Ohio and its neighboring states. The politics there, I think, surprised a lot of people during the last election. Can you tell me what would be required to change things a bit in the Midwest and Upper Midwest?
Biden's going to, I feel good about Biden. I'll back up. Trump carried Ohio by 8 points. Most pundits, including Biden's campaign people and most Democratic politicos I know, thought that that Biden couldn't win in Ohio, that Trump couldn't be beaten in Ohio this year. People have changed that view as they've watched this election go by, and the reason is Biden really his May elections are about contrast. They're about whose side you're on. You've won 3 times countywide because people think you're on their side and they trust you. And Trump Biden will talk about workers. I think he's the most pro-worker, pro-labor Democratic nominee of either party in a generation. He will contrast that with Trump's betrayal of workers. And I think that enough. I mean, we are a working class state. We used to be one of the high income states because we were a more working class country. Now we're less of a blue collar country, and Ohio's income relatively has declined. And the irony of all this is Democrats used to be the working class party, as you know, even when you started Dow, let alone 20 years earlier. And now we're the party of metro areas and university towns. And I won by winning big in the metro areas, big in the university towns, and not getting slaughtered in the rest of the state. And that's kind of how you win the Midwest industrial states and Midwest Great Lakes states. And the numbers don't always work, but Ohio, I think, is going to work this year for Biden.
So turning back to some of the folks you outlined in the book, the chapter on Bobby Kennedy is interesting because you don't spend a lot of time on his time in the Senate or as Attorney General. There's really this remarkable moment, 88 days, when he was running and the front runner for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Can you talk a little bit about that moment, about why you chose to focus on that part, and how that legacy fits into this longer narrative?
Kennedy was not a progressive his whole life, or Hugo Black was, or that Al Gore Sr. was. Kennedy worked for Joe McCarthy. He was kind of a political hack when he ran up till his brother's assassination. And I think like the three Kennedys who served in the Senate, the president, then Bobby, then Ted, although Ted came to the Senate before Bobby by 2 years, more or less. They were not particularly good elected officials in their early years. I mean, Ted, as you pointed out earlier, Ted was in the Senate about 40 years, and he was his first 20. He was not that great a senator. He was running for president. He was doing what he did. And his last 20, I would argue, he's the best senator and maybe in Senate history. Jack, nobody said Jack was a particularly good senator. But he was planning to run for president his entire time. And Bobby didn't really have a lot of interest in the Senate, but it was a platform to talk about civil rights and the things he cared about. But Bobby was initially for the Vietnam War. Bobby was not terrible in civil rights, but wasn't a leader. And I talked in the book about when he came to Mississippi, and I had dinner. My wife and I had dinner with Marion Wright Edelman, who was then Marion Wright and was running Head Start in Mississippi, grew up, African-American woman, grew up in South Carolina, founded the Children's Defense Fund later. And she saw in Bobby an almost turn on the switch kind of empathy. She was just overwhelmed by his empathy when she didn't really much like the Kennedys, because the Kennedys were, President Kennedy appointed some of the worst segregationist judges in the South. And so she really didn't have much use for his brother, his surviving brother, but she was really taken by him when she saw the way he interacted with some of the poorest people in the Mississippi Delta. And Kennedy then, I mean, what he as a human being became, and I don't know if he didn't have those empathy genes in him prior to his brother's assassination or prior to going to South Africa and making the speech that to the white kids in South Africa about race, or in that Mississippi hut. It wasn't clear, but he clearly then was an inspiration to so many of us. I was 15 when he died, so he didn't inspire me in his life. He inspired me after he died, as he did so many.
He was my presidential candidate as a grade school kid, and then when we came back to school in the fall, he was gone. It was a strange moment. It was a strange moment in this country, with Dr. King and then Bobby Kennedy being killed in such quick succession. It is, you mentioned though, who is a person in the book, you talk about the policies and you talk about the political movements, but you also explore these people personally, and you have these sort of interludes between the chapters about these senators, which you call Thoughts from Desk 88, where you talk about your personal experience and observations. One of the things about Kennedy that you said that was interesting is he really came into his own in that moment, and it seemed to be authentic that he was really feeling the sympathy, the empathy towards those who had the least and had been excluded in society, and that's something he somehow grew as an adult in his 40s. Is that something that you've seen a lot of your colleagues in the Senate?
Nobody as dramatic as he. It kind of, I mean, most people by the time they get to the Senate are pretty mature in their views. I mean, their views have evolved to be not unchanging. Nobody's views are unchanging, but they're not. There's by the time someone gets to the Senate nowadays, and I think through most Senate history, their ideas are already pretty well formed and set. I don't think Bobby Kennedy's were. I mean, I think Bobby Kennedy hadn't really thought of these issues. He recognized it may have been in his late 30s he began to recognize his privilege more than he did as a younger man. That wouldn't be so surprising on somebody, and many people in the Senate never recognized their privilege and never recognized the fact that they were born male and white with some money in America, and that's 3 steps ahead of most of the rest of the country. But that's a good question because I think Bobby had it. He clearly had it in him, and I don't know of any elected official I've seen that changed so dramatically in the last 10 years of his life the way he did. You mentioned the thoughts. When I originally wrote the book, it took about 10 years to write. My day job obviously kept me from putting huge amounts of time into it in any stretch, but I wrote these 8 biographies, and my wife is Dow and I were talking. My wife is a Pulitzer Prize journalist. She just came out with her first novel called The Daughters of Erie-Town, about a working class family, and we read each other's stuff, but we coach each other. I mean, she coaches me because she's the great writer in the family. But I thought I had finished this book 5 years ago, and I showed it to her, and she looked at me and she said, "It's about half done." It was not a good week for our marriage because I really thought I was about done. And she said, "There's not enough of you in here." So that's when I really went back and didn't just write these 8 biographies because any historian can do that. I wrote them and then injected myself and my views and commentary about them and their era and its application today. And and then Connie loves to say after it came out, said, "See, I was right. It got a whole lot better because you took 5 more years to do it." And, I don't write for a living. And it was okay that there was no deadline of getting it out, but it did make it better.
I mean, you don't write for a living, but I have to say, folks watching, the senator is a very good writer. And it is an enjoyable and inspiring read. Even if you're not an elected official, if you're just someone who's pulling for America to fulfill its promise, you can click at the bottom and get a copy of it. So I want to talk about the last senator you profile, a guy who's gotten a bum rap nationally, but a real American hero, George McGovern. Tell us a little bit about your experience with him.
Yeah, McGovern was the only one of the 8 that I knew. I got to know McGovern the last 10 years of his life. I will never forget, I was presiding as freshman senators in the majority. You sit at the presiding officer's chair and preside 3-4 hours a week. You sort of take turns. And I was sitting there on a Friday morning. There wasn't much going on the floor. And when you're presiding over the Senate, you sit at a chair up on the top level, top tier, if you will. And there are 5 or 6 pages that sit on the steps beneath you. And if you need an errand and we're in session, the pages will run and do whatever. These are high school kids and boys, and used to be all boys. Now it's boys and girls, of course. And George McGovern happened to walk in the back of the Senate chamber. And as I said, I'd gotten to know him pretty well, not really well, but pretty well by then. And I said to these kids, I said, "You know who that is that walked in?" And this would have been 2007 or 8 or 9. And they said no. And I said, "His name's George McGovern." And there was not a flicker of recognition. It really did bring to me the Marcus Aurelius talked about the writer of Meditations and the premier of what am I thinking? The emperor of Rome, of Italy, of Rome, Roman Empire in 180, I think. And that he said that people return to dust, and he had these conversations with his slave and how they both just would turn to dust at some point, and how nobody really remembers. I mean, we're all, and it really kind of explained that very well, but brought that to me. But McGovern, as you said, was really underappreciated. He took a state that had never elected a Democrat essentially, and fought his way into the House and Senate courageously took on the war when almost nobody else did. Lost a race where the first campaign I really worked in earnest was in 72 when I was 19. And, he just got obliterated. He tells a story that Walter Mondale, 12 years later, came up to him after Mondale lost as decisively and said to McGovern, when do you get over a loss like that? Been 12 years from McGovern. He said, I'll let you know when I get over it. So going to go in front of a generally successful career and have that happen. And McGovern, he never really did get over it, but his heart was so good, and he was such a kind man, and he suffered tragedy in his own life with the death of his adult daughter, and he was just a good man. And I tried to explore he made a huge difference in international poverty. Teamed up with Bob Dole when you could do things like that bipartisanly in those days, and he made an impact on a whole lot of people that never knew his name. And that's sort of, to me, that's the definition of success, making an impact for a whole lot of people and they never know your name.
So we're looking ahead to this election, and there are so many questions. We have a debate tomorrow night, which everyone is going to be watching, but I want to ask you first about this Supreme Court nomination / debacle, and what you think is going to happen and what you think about it.
Well, Democrats can't stop him, can't stop her, can't stop McConnell from confirming her. It's possible some of their mind. I mean, it really is. McConnell won't do the $600 a week, won't put money in public education so schools that aren't the wealthiest school districts can't open for students in person, won't help fund local governments, kind of cut funding off for a lot of smaller businesses. The airlines are still in question, and that matters a lot, obviously, in your county and your part of the state, your part of the country. But he can find the time to ram through a judge who will just be another special interest Supreme Court justice. I mean, she will, the court, it's not just the court is so wrong on choice now, likely, and so wrong on the Affordable Care Act. And it's pretty certain they're going to take away health care from people in the middle of a pandemic. They decide, this court will decide whether it's the drug companies or the insurance companies or the oil companies or climate denial. They will line up with corporate interests virtually every single time. And I fear for my country on civil rights and voting rights. I fear for my country on climate. I know that people watching this in King County and or in the state of Washington are overwhelmingly understand climate change, and especially people that would watch this, I assume, and this court will likely not think that's much of a public health issue, and it breaks my heart. But I don't think we stop it. I think every Democrat will vote no, but that probably won't be enough.
So I guess we have to stop at the election before we move on to what the agenda is for after January 20th. But let's just ask, what do you think is going to be the trajectory of this election? Is it going to be a landslide? Are we going to squeak by? We're going to have another surprise as we had in 2016.
Well, I think the Biden campaign decision today to go full in Ohio, which they hadn't before, tells you that they have come to the conclusion they can win a landslide. If the Democrats win, Biden wins Ohio, he will absolutely win Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Those are easier states. He likely will win Arizona. That's not really related to that. And his chances in Florida are pretty good. And if any combination of those happens and it's a 200 or 330, 40 vote electoral college victory, it really is a landslide in the electoral college. It will do two and a half things. The first thing it will do is make it that much harder for Trump to play his games to try to contest the election if he's lost the electoral college, not by 1 vote or 5 votes or 10 votes, but by 30, 40, 50 votes. Number one. Number two, it will make it easier for Democrats to govern next year, because to come out of an decisive electoral college win gives you more kind of oomph when it comes to passing legislation. And third, it might, and this is why I say 2.5, it might make Republicans re-examine their position, their giving over their manhood and womanhood, if you will, to Donald Trump. I mean, it's maybe Republicans will question what they have done, how they've sold their souls to Trump, how they've been spineless, how they just are afraid to criticize Trump. I saw it during impeachment. I wrote the last chapter of the book for the paperback edition about impeachment and the coronavirus. The first part of the book came out a year ago, so I had none of this. But the fear that Republicans felt during impeachment, the fear that they barely criticized Trump when he was so dismissive and disdainful towards people who died serving their country. And even then, Republicans didn't speak out. So they may go through a period of self-examination and make a decision that they've got to be a different party, maybe change their views. I mean, they've become a more and more racist party. They were moving that direction. A retired Republican congressman said to me right before the coronavirus, he said, Donald Trump's not an outlier, he's an accelerant. He said his party had become more and more racist. Trump got it there faster. His party had become more and more intolerant and anti-immigrant. Trump just got it there faster. His party had become more elitist and looked out for corporate interests at the expense of workers. Trump just got him there faster. So they may or may not, do that kind of reflection. I don't know. We'll see.
So let's say we do win a decisive victory in the presidency, and that we manage to recapture the United States Senate. What is the agenda for next year and the year after? Yeah, and is this the dawning of a new progressive era, or just a blip?
I think it is. I think Joe Biden started off not thinking that. I think Biden thought of himself as a bit of an incrementalist, that he would restore our nation to what it was pre-Trump. But I think the coronavirus and the primaries and the energy in the country have all kind of conspired or come together so that I think Biden's going to think of himself as LBJ. I mean, he's not told me that. That's my opinion, where he does big things, and big things. I mean, the three great moral issues of our time, you've touched on them. I know you talk about them. You combine two of them in a I thought, a pretty good way, but one is certainly climate, and the other two are income inequality and racial disparities. And you can kind of combine those two, certainly, and talk about them together as you do in your campaigns and in some of your speeches that I looked at. So I think that's where we go. And that means we've got to deal with housing. We've got to deal with structural racism in housing and the judicial system and voting rights. First thing I think we do is pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to restore the voting rights at the Supreme Court, followed by Southern legislatures restricting voting rights one after another, after another, after another. I think we do things like that. I think we do Medicare at 55. I think we do something about student loans, student loan forgiveness, because this generation's so afflicted, especially after this coronavirus. Such a horribly difficult start for so many young people when you stack on the coronavirus on top of student debt. I think we raise the minimum wage. I think we do a number of things that people will feel benefit from right away, and also will have a long-term staying power that Social Security and Medicare and civil rights and rural electrification did.
So I want to ask Candace from Town Hall if we have some questions she can offer up. As some of you may have detected, we have a very tentative technological setup here tonight. I actually dropped off once and had to get back on. So I'm hesitating to start monkeying with the computer myself for fear of having the whole thing go. Candace, are you on, and can you share some questions from the audience?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So this first one, going back to talking about the Supreme Court outlook, is from Marcus. And he's asking, with the recent nomination of Amy Barrett for the Supreme Court and likely Senate confirmation, there's lots of discussion in the progressive community for the need to end the filibuster and to look at modifying the Supreme Court to add seats for the right-wing hostile takeover of the courts. What is your opinion on this issue?
I feel certain that we will eliminate the filibuster. I don't think we can govern without it. The question on the filibuster, and I don't know what we will do with the court system. I think that's too early to tell. What we do with there's talk of admitting Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. Puerto Rico is bigger than something like 15 or 20 states. I don't know exactly, but it's bigger than Idaho. It's bigger than certainly all the Montana, Delaware, the one congressional district states too. But I think the filibuster, the question is, do we try to pass the minimum wage increase or Medicare at 55 or voting rights, and Republicans filibuster? Then we eliminate the filibuster after they have shown they will not respect majority rule, or do we just do it immediately? And when you think about how undemocratic small d our country's gotten, Democrats, I don't know anybody who doesn't think the Democrats will not win the popular vote. We will win the popular vote this year by a huge margin. So that means, but twice in our recent history is the popular vote winner lost the general election, lost the electoral college. The Senate, every election from 2006 up through now, with the exception of 2014, the Democrats, there were more votes cast for Democrats for the Senate than for Republicans, even though the Republicans controlled the Senate and the Supreme Court through most of this time. And so the majority or plurality has simply not had its way in running our government. And that hasn't forced Trump and McConnell to say, well, because there are really more your votes than ours, even though we won under the rules, that Wyoming has the same number of senators as Washington State and Idaho has the same number as California, we will be more bipartisan. When Republicans take power, they do everything they can to enhance their power. They go after voting rights. They go after they exploit, they weaken campaign finance laws. They do redistricting, all the things that give them more power, and that's who they are. And that's what for McConnell, this is a great thing. I think he's willing for Trump to lose just to get another member of the Supreme Court. I mean, not that it's exactly a trade-off like that, but for McConnell, it's always power, and it's always giving more power to corporate interests.
This next question is from Jeff. He's saying, in the same manner as civil rights was the defining issue for so many occupants of Desk 88, it seems like that theme for equity and environmental justice is today's issue as well. As a senator that represents the industrial heartland, how do we pull together a coalition that addresses the historical inequities of inner cities and also addresses the insecurity of blue-collar mine workers who are faced with job loss?
It's a very good question. Thank you. I've had a 100% rating from the League of Conservation Voters and other environmental groups my whole career. And you can be strong in the environment and represent an industrial state if you're talking about jobs and fighting for workers. And that's what we need to do. I mean, there's a lot of jobs in wind turbines, a lot of jobs in solar, a lot of jobs in the right kind of climate policy. I'm working with Senator Schumer on replacing. There are 120,000 buses in this country. Most all of them consume fossil fuel. Many of them are old and are less energy efficient. We need both we need a huge national project on replacing these buses with energy efficient, low carbon or no carbon buses. That will create jobs. We need to make sure they're made in America with American steel, and there's simply no reason we can't do things like that. And it's jobs programs that are all tied into clean energy and into infrastructure that way. And the Senate could have done that 4 years ago when Trump was elected. Instead, he took the $1 trillion that he promised for infrastructure and turned it into a tax cut. And we know, in light of the stories in the last 48 hours or so, what that tax cut, those kinds of laws meant to this president.
Right.
Senator, be really interested to see, are you able to hear me, Senator?
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of infrastructure package, up to and including a sort of New Deal style package, could be put together to try to pull us out of the doldrums here economically and reinvest in the things that allow Americans broadly to succeed? We're talking about electric buses or zero emission buses. We, in the next week or so, will retire our transit fleet's last 2 fully diesel buses. And in my budget I delivered last week, we're adding 40 more battery electric buses headed toward zero emission fleet within the next about decade and a half. So federal help would be great in accelerating that work, our light rail construction work, our restoration of our waterways, and much more. Is there a chance for a major federal infusion of capital funds?
Yeah, we've got to do a major jobs program. I mean, this election, the coronavirus is even if we had a president now that actually would do the right things with the coronavirus, the restaurants aren't all going to open up immediately, and all the venues. I was on a call today with Ohio Arts Council people in many smaller counties and big cities, and Cleveland especially has some of the best cultural attractions of any city in America. And people aren't going to concerts they're going to museums in small numbers, all of that. And so we've got to put people to work in a real infrastructure bill, but infrastructure in Scoop Jackson and Maggie's days, Warren Magnuson's days were highways, bridges, water, sewer. They're much more than that today. And we will, I assume east of the Cascades, you've got, and probably even not just east of the Cascades, you have areas that don't have good broadband, and we certainly have many of them in Ohio. And it puts students at a disadvantage, it puts small business, it puts everybody at a disadvantage. So I don't see any doubt that if Democrats win, that I just would certain that we will do major infrastructure, and it'll be defined very differently from 20 or 30 or 50 years ago.
Really interested in how we can kind of tee up a nationwide focus on infrastructure. The joke has been every week is infrastructure week over the last few years with the Trump administration, yet it never comes to fruition. And meanwhile, we're here locally trying to build $54 billion rail system largely on our own, tie this region together, and working with a lot of partners to see if we can tee up a high-speed rail system linking not just our region, but British Columbia as well. Candace, do you have another question?
Yeah, so this one's from Mark. He's saying, I grew up in, I think it's Xenia, Ohio. I might be saying that wrong. Started my career in Dayton and lived in the state until 1988. The decline of Dayton is not just a story of deindustrialization, but just as importantly, it illustrates the devastating effects of racism. In a time of such polarization, what lessons do we have to learn from Ohio, and how can we change public policy to avoid repeating the mistakes of our past?
Well, we start with recognizing it. Dayton, interestingly, Mark, there is a young African-American woman named Desiree Timms. You should Google her. She used to work in my office in Washington. First, her family go to college. After she left my office, she went to Georgetown Law School, and she's the Democratic nominee for Congress in the Miami Valley, where you grew up, Mark. And she is, it's one of two races that the National Democrats have targeted that we can win from a Republican incumbent. So things are changing, not enough. That doesn't mean that alone, of course. I think I have a resolution I introduced, and Cory Booker and Kamala Harris joined me on it to declare racism a public health crisis. And you start with that. You start with understanding that infant mortality, maternal mortality. There was a terrific piece on NPR in the last week about a young Black woman, epidemiologist at the CDC in Atlanta, that died a week after giving birth. The maternal mortality rate among Black women is just embarrassingly high for a country like ours, rich as ours. And so much of structural racism is it's housing discrimination. It's from the Black codes to Jim Crow to redlining to Trump locking in discriminatory housing, racist housing policies. And we've got to undo all that, but we recognize it by really looking at what it is. But I think the country's changed on race, and I've never said that in my life before, because I didn't think we had. And we've changed quickly for three reasons. One is we see on video every week, it seems, another Black man killed by the police. Second, we've seen with this pandemic, the great revealer, the racism that's so evident through this pandemic. And third, we have a essentially we have a racist president of the United States. I think those three things have made the American public, it made people that look like us, made us understand much better that this is a serious, the most central serious problem. You asked that question, Dow, earlier about the South. I mean, that's the story, right? Not just the story in the South. It's the story in Dayton. It's the story in Seattle. It's the story everywhere.
Yeah. So I think I'd like to take one final question and bring it back to your book, Senator. So this is from Sherry, and she's asking if you could sit with and ask advice from one of the previous dwellers at Desk 88. Who would it be, and what advice would you seek?
You know, I've not thought of that. I think I'd ask. I think I might ask Proxmire, one of the senators from Wisconsin. He lived his life. He never had a tough election because all he did was politics, and all he did was just really had no other life. And he said to Tom Harkin late in his career, Senator Young at that point, senator from Iowa, said, Harkin said, how do you win elections so easily? And Proxmire looked at Harkin and said, you don't want to live the way I lived the last 30 years. And I guess I'd like to explore that with Proxmire, that we all get too consumed with our jobs, or too consumed with our careers, or too consumed with something that's not fully living. And I just like to hear Proxmire talk about that. I might give you a different answer tomorrow if you ask, because I don't really know what question I'd ask, but that was a really good question. Thank you for that, Sherry.
Well, it looks like you've got a lot of family photos in the background. It looks like family is really important to you. So
we got shared kids for the first time in several weeks outside yesterday, our small grandkids, and it was so great. They are a couple hours away, but we just didn't. My wife has asthma, and we just didn't think we could get that close, but we did it, and we were really safe. And they had been self-quarantined for a couple of weeks, and it was really wonderful. So, but thanks for asking that.
Well, thank you, Candace, and thank you, Senator, for fielding our questions and being here tonight. The book, folks, because you tuned in, is Desk 88, 8 Progressive Senators Who Changed America. It's available here through the website, and I would recommend it to you. Having had a chance to read it, I am certainly inspired to take some of the lessons here and put them into practice. And I also think that it is a good roadmap for those of us who want to see our nation redeemed. Senator, any last words?
No, Dow, just thank you for doing this, and thanks for engaging. And I love what this town hall does, and these kind of fora are really good for the public and for all of us that get to share ideas and take questions. And Candace, thank you for making it happen tonight, keeping it running smoothly through technical issues. I didn't think people in Seattle ever had technical issues. That was people back east. I was shocked. I was almost pleased by that it doesn't just happen to people like me. So, but thanks, everybody. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I hope everybody has a great night. We'll see you next time.
Good evening. Thanks.
Bye.
Dow, thanks. And call me, Dow, just send me a note about that, all right?
Okay.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks.